Nobody's born incredible. People who do incredible things simply took the right steps. This is our journey. This is the hunt for incredible. In today's episode, I get to interview Rachel Hewitt. Rachel owns a marketing agency, a nonprofit, and is a professional actor. She graduated with her master's in acting from Yale and performed on Broadway, all while starting her own marketing agency and nonprofit, which is now nationwide. What makes this episode so great is how meta we get on building an authentic personal brand. We talk about everything from how to connect with an audience at scale to sharing an authentic version of yourself with the world, regardless of your audience or its size. We even go over a technique to supercharge getting over your fears by acting like a literal clown. Yes, you heard that correctly. I cannot make this stuff up. Her marketing company produces my podcast and a lot of its content, and every time I get off the phone with her, I think to myself, I need to bottle that and share it with the world. So this is my best attempt at it. I hope you enjoy. So you accomplished an incredible feat making it to Broadway. I need to look up the stat. I'll throw it in the intro. It's got to be at least like 0.001% of people make it who were like initially had the idea of doing it, right? And went for it. And then, of course, as time goes on, they drop off and off and off. And then of the few who actually continue to follow through, a fraction of those actually make it. So it's absolutely amazing. And I'd love to spend some time talking about not just the perseverance that you had to get there and to keep pushing forward, but the skill that you developed and then eventually leveraged into social media and brand strategy and everything else that is so valuable today.
My name is Rachel. I am a marketer professionally, and I'm also a professional film and stage actor. I do both simultaneously, and I feel like they inform each other. I started off wanting to do acting, but not knowing that it could be an actual job. And so I majored in college in communications and art with only a minor in theater so that I could get the scholarship, which I did. And then, 4 years into doing college, by the time I was 19, I was an assistant to the producer of an international creative advertising agency. And we were covering accounts like for Procter and Gamble, like Bounty, Charmin, Pepto-Bismol for all of Latin America, like all of these incredible spots, incredible commercials, like classics like Si Se Puede with Bounty. That was me in the editing room, to the point where I was given the responsibility of overseeing creative calls with the client, overseeing editing and having to like produce quality control check, copywriting. It was one of the best years in terms of immersive experience that I could ask for. And that was my sophomore to junior year. And then I got a part in the musical, and my boss was like, well, you need to choose. And I was like, I really want to do this musical. So I just did it. And I'm sure she was thinking, like, what is this girl doing? Like, she has the opportunity of a lifetime, and she's like absorbing all this stuff with passion, and suddenly like pulls a hard right. But, later on, I would look back on that time as I really made a decision for my own freedom that would later come in handy when I started my own business, of realizing that one of my key values for work has to be that I have agency over my time and how my skill sets are used. But I did the musical, and then senior year came around, and I was like, I guess I'll move to New York, see what happens, just for fun for a little while. And one of my dearest professors, Dr. Rainier, was like, well, have you applied to grad school yet? And I was like, no, I haven't really gotten around to it. I've researched a few schools. And in my head, I was like, I don't want to go to grad school. I'm done writing papers. I'm really good at it, but like, I want to do something fun and creative and just get out of school. It's been too long here. We spend so long in school. And he said, no, you need to audition for Yale and NYU. And I was like, yeah, totally. Okay, great. I'll apply. I'll apply tonight. And I did. And I had missed the deadline for both. And I was like, this is perfect. Now I can just tell him, shucks, I missed the deadline. Too bad. Like, I'll just, just count it as an L and just move on with my life. And I filled out the application and submitted it after the deadline still, so I could tell him, like, I gave it a shot. And almost within minutes, Yale came back and it said, sorry, it's past the deadline. Like, there are no spots for you. And another email came back from NYU saying, here's your slot. And I was like, what the? Oh, and I was so frustrated because I was like, I did not expect that to happen, but my school is willing to pay for the trip. So I was like, I know. I'll use this as practice. I'll use this as practice auditions because everything's a learning opportunity. I love to travel. They flew me out to Chicago when it was way too cold. And I walk up to this hotel hallway where the auditions are to check in, and there are like 12 schools there in the hallway. What folks don't know is that you audition for grad school and it's just really prepping you for the cattle calls of auditions. It's just kind of like, whoa, wild. And I will say this later on in the story, and I'll say this now. My best gift in that moment was ignorance. I had no clue how competitive this was. I had no clue how low my chances were. I walked down that hallway like, I'm supposed to be here. You're all supposed to be here. Like, I didn't plan on being here. I got a slot, so it's mine. And I wish I carried that attitude with me more in life. Every time I have, it has been such a return on just like believing that I belonged in that room, and which I believed that weekend to like my great reward. So I go and I check in for NYU and I'm early because I love showing up early and for theater stuff. And I go and I start stretching in the hallway and looking around. And I walk past this door and it said Yale. And I was like, oh, that was the other school he told me I should audition for. And they had a sign on the door that said walk-ins welcome. And I was like, huh, cool. I'm here. I'm here for the experience. And so I asked the girl at the table, who I now know is a dear friend. But I was like, hey, so does that mean you could just like walk in? Like I could just like sign up and walk in? And she's like, yeah, that's what it means. You can pay the fee and you can walk in. And I was like, great. Yeah, I'm on it. So I signed up. Walk-ins went at the end of the day. I was like, cool. I'll see you back here later today, friend. High five. Again, totally ignorant of like the seriousness of what this is. And I go downstairs and I get some Wi-Fi and I write my essay really fast for them. And I will never get to this day. I didn't overthink it. Again, a great asset where I just like tapped in to my thoughts and it was like, what does the word theater mean to you? And I was like, theater is the sounds of life that we can recreate for other people, was just what I wanted to write about. And I wrote, I will never forget because I felt the sentence coming out of me. I didn't think about the sentence. And this is like really some like, if you saw it in the film, you'd be like, oh, that's how her marketing started. But like, no, this is just like paying attention to how your body and your mind works. If you're the weird kid, like you've got something to give the world. So I'm just writing and I start to write things like what I was hearing in that cafe where I was getting Wi-Fi. I was like, just from like the clinking of the spoon on a cup, I was like, this sounds like music to me. This sounds like a world that we can capture. And if we put it on stage, people can recognize or not recognize and want to learn more about. And I just told the truth because that's what was happening in that moment. And I think like we're like, tell the truth. It doesn't have to be like angsty or doesn't have to be like what's hard hitting. Actually, if you're just like really telling the truth about what's going on in that moment, it feels relatable. And it was writing I was really proud of. And I went upstairs and I did my audition for NYU. I got called back within the hour because they do hour callbacks and they do end of day callbacks. And then I didn't get a callback for the end of day. So like my journey was done for NYU. So I just went and I hung out and I was like, oh, bummer. That's really going to sting in New York when I get rejected. And so then I went to the Yale room and I waited my turn and they called us in because they extended the hour for walk-ins. They were so gracious. They were so kind. And I did my audition and then they called me in at the end of the hour and they're like, these are our end of day callbacks. So we'd like to talk to you. And again, my ignorance, they're like, we just want to ask you some questions. And one of the questions that they asked me was, you know, you're young, because going to grad school right out of undergrad would end up being a unique quality of my class specifically, but it wasn't as common at the time. They're like, you're young, to go to grad school right out of undergrad. Don't you want to like, see the world? And I just responded honestly. And I was like, honestly, yeah. I don't know if grad school's for me. And I'm sure they were like, well, this one's not been coached, which is like, again, maybe my great quality of standing out accidentally. But I was like, yeah, honestly, I don't know if grad school's for me. I do want to travel the world. I want to see things. I wanted to go to New York right after this, but I'm really here for the experience and I'm here to see like what this is all about. And I got advice from someone I really respect. So yeah, I'm just feeling it. I'd say I'm 50-50. And they're like, great. Okay. And they're like, well, do you have any other schools who are looking at you? And I was like, yeah, NYU, but I think that if I don't get an email from them, I'm not going to be, and I was like, not leveraging anything in that interview. I was just being genuine. I was just being myself, which is, you know, for me, the oft forgotten leverage is authenticity. Like when you have nothing left, just see where a real connection can get you in the room. And that's all I went in with. Um, and then I got an email from NYU after that weekend that said, no, thank you. And then I got an email from Yale inviting me to callback weekend. And callback weekend is where they fly you out. I didn't even know where it was. I was like, oh, it's in Connecticut. That's right. Like where those movies are based when there's like preppy kids who go to college. Oh my gosh, like the ignorance abounds. So then I just go and I spend my weekend there. And the entire weekend was us taking some of the classes that they had set up for us and the professors watching us. And I just remember how good it felt to be completely immersed in that world where there was nothing competing for my attention. I could just give it to the thing that I loved, which I would later learn is something I really want in addition to agency in like a workplace, is just to be able to immerse myself in something I'm passionate about. And so when I did the interview at the end of the weekend after taking classes with like the clown teacher and the Shakespeare teacher and getting bizarre assignments, like two people run up to the front of the room. We're not going to tell you who you are. You're just going to do it. And one of you is going to do 4 lines of iambic pentameter. The other one's going to do 4 lines that match. And we've never met each other before. And you just throw yourself in. And you realize in retrospect, oh, the audition is also, how do you just throw yourself in to this space? How do you just throw yourself into this exercise? How are you practicing being fearless, which is one of the greatest things that came out of grad school too. And then at the end of the weekend, they do an interview with like all these people along the table who I would later learn are very well known, who I had no idea who they were. And they asked me, they're like, last time we spoke, you weren't sure if grad school was for you. Are you, how are you feeling? And you were talking to NYU. And I was like, oh yeah, they sent me an email. They said, thanks, but no thanks. It's like not a thing. And they're like, oh, okay, thanks for that. I'm a terrible poker player, in case you can't tell. And then they asked, okay, well, the other question we had is you weren't sure if grad school is right for you. Has any of that changed since we talked? And I was like, let me get this straight. Let me ask you a question first. And they're like, okay. And I was like, this weekend was just like taking classes. This grad school, is it just like making theater 24 hours a day, like 7 days a week? Like that's all you do? Is that what grad school is? And they go, yeah, that's what grad school is. And I go, oh, then grad school's totally for me. Yeah, I'm all about this. And they're like, oh, good. Well, great. We're glad that you're happy and you like it. But that also, like, that ignorance bred a confidence that I look back now and it's like, wow, own what you love, like in the room. Like, if you are playing your cards too close to the chest and you're trying so hard to like anticipate what they want you to say, you're going to forget what you have to say. And in that room, all I had was my honest connection and what I could bring to the table. And I was unapologetic about it. I was just like, and it just came with so much joy that, at the very least, since I was not coached, it was not my skill that got me through that interview. It was just my connection. And by then I had fallen so in love with the experience that when they called me a little bit later, personal phone call inviting me to do it, I just like burst into tears. And I realized that I had found a home that I didn't know I was looking for. Uh, and that's how I got into Yale. And it was 3 of the, greatest artistic years of my life. So I have a year of like international creative advertising agency training and immersion under my belt. And then 3 years of, at least at the time, we were ranked the #1 grad school in the country for sure, and competitively in the world. And it just all coalesced into, just laying the foundation for what I do now.
That's a really beautiful story. What would you say set apart the people who made it past the audition round and actually got the offers from the people who didn't?
This is interesting. I don't have to speculate about this because while we were there, we asked our acting chair, like, what is it? Because we were allowed to watch other people's auditions. I'm so glad there weren't people in the room for mine. We're allowed to like come in and observe. And I was like, this is cruel. Like, there's enough pressure. There are like 1,000 people auditioning one year. And in like Chicago and New York and like all these different places. But we asked them because we would watch people and we'd be like, holy smokes, the pressure of choosing, it looks impossible. Um, and one of the most beautiful things about I think our professors, the ones who really connected with us, was there was such a value in like the humility of the program, but also an understanding of the standards at the same time. And it was pretty exemplified in the response when we said, how do you choose? And as our acting chair, Ron Van Loo, at the time, still like an absolute sage in the theater. And he said, the first question we ask is, and we all like held our breaths and listened. He goes, do I want to spend 3 years with this person? And we are like, and he goes, and then the second question I ask is, can they act? And that was it. And we were all like, uh, oh, oh, okay. Okay. And I was like, I'm so glad I didn't know that before going in. I think I would overthink the crap
Yeah.
out of that. But just the incredible power, again, of connection where the person on the other side of the table has a need too, where they're not just the one with something to give you. They are really hoping that when you join them, what you're excited to bring will benefit everyone. And, the best advice that was the hardest for me to register for a long time after graduating, that I worked very hard. And they said, it's going to take you 7 years after grad school to get this. It took about 7 years, where the person on the other side of the table, with, the rare exception of a few like awful people, but the majority of the people on the other side of the table want you to succeed. So when you walk into that audition room and they're sitting there and they're watching you, don't project on them that they're judging you. Don't project on them that they're critiquing you. And even if that's true, that's going to completely disempower you. Project onto them that they're watching you, anticipating your success. And I've also taken that into like meeting with clients and meeting with potential clients and doing auditions and even like having conversations with my kids' teachers of the difference in the confidence in myself and also where the conversation goes when I enter the room, expecting us to want the other person's success has been like a game changer.
Yeah, there's something beautiful about the going into something with ignorance too and leaning into the authenticity, which is if you lean into authenticity and you listen closely to what genuinely aligns with you, then you'll end up where you're supposed to be. Easy. And you'll
100%.
end up with who you're supposed to end up with.
100%.
Going for what you authentically love and leaning hard into that, that individual is going to succeed over the person who's inauthentically trying to do that thing. Yeah, tell me more about this exercise. So what was the purpose of it? What was the process and what was the outcome?
Let's get weird. So there's an exercise called contact improv that we do, that we did all throughout theater, but like it got super intense and like advanced at Yale School of Drama, where I got my master's. And anyone who's like into theater and like theater practice is like, yeah, that's 101, right? It's basics, foundational. What it is essentially two people who have to do what becomes acrobatics without saying a word or planning it beforehand. And what it requires is physical listening and being both proactive and responsive simultaneously. And that is exactly what the exercise is designed to elicit. And there were moments where you would just they're just like grab a partner and you just like got paired up with someone in your class. Didn't matter like what the difference was in physical size, didn't matter what the difference was in physical strength. You immediately had to like listen to how your body was responding to them and what you could give at the same time. And I was like lifting huge dudes on my back and like flowing. Sometimes there'd be music playing, sometimes not. And then you would just like say like, okay, come in front of the class. And you would go as a pair and you would stand and you would look at each other and you would say, no one move first, move at the same time. And that was the only direction, the only instruction. And you would just begin. And before you know it, people were doing lifts and turns and stretches. And it looks like choreography when two people are so synergized that they're being proactive and responsive at the same time. It's the listening and acting at the same time, which obviously feeds into work on stage, but is very much like what this conversation can be, where we're listening and being proactive at the same time. So it's something I've experienced with and love to do. Where that has come into play, both in acting as like a very useful skill when you're on stage and you're performing this piece live, but for 700 1,000 new people every night, is that you have to be both proactive in moving the play forward, but responsive in listening to what the other actors are giving you, the tone of the audience, the temperature of the room, so that you can be guiding the play, but also responding authentically. And this is a simultaneous action. We think about listening and speaking as this, then this, and this, then this, but they're not actually that linear. When we're truly present in that moment, listening and being proactive can be a simultaneous reality. And it's a bit transcendent when that happens. And I know I'm speaking very abstractly, but the way that this has also translated to business is that in marketing, you have to be both listening and leading the conversation at the same time. And I feel like the folks who are really gifted at messaging and, you know, myself and my team, what we really get excited about is by creating a strategy that's forward thinking, but also feels directly responsive to what's happening in the moment. And those aren't a this, then this action. Those are simultaneous realities that, um, you know, there are algorithms, there's techniques, there's strategies, but the idea of like being present and practicing that as part of how you do business, part of how you create content, part of how you create art, it applies to every single category you can think of in being both agile and prepared, in the same moment.
So what are you developing in those moments, or is it more to better understand something so that you can engage with others outside of that better?
So this is also a simultaneous goal. For the people inside the exercise, it's about developing that skill. For people outside witnessing the exercise, something is being created. And that's also what happens in marketing, and that's also what happens in like product design, is that you're constantly renewing. Like you cannot be still, you cannot be stuck. The evolution is a state of being. It's not a place of arrival, right? The messaging is evolving. You still have like a brand identity, you have certain things that feel stationary, but they're actually just scaffolding. Everything that you're moving through it is alive and it needs to feel human and responsive and organic. But what's happening on the outside is people are receiving product, they're receiving content, they're receiving messaging. And so the duality of that is also like, where do you live, inside or outside of what's being created? It's going to be a different attempt, different skill set being built, and different on what you're receiving.
Not only that, but your creation for the audience is a byproduct of you focusing on the engagement with somebody else.
Correct.
You're not thinking about how can I entertain, you're thinking about how do I flow with this improv movement and engagement with somebody else, and then people are witnessing and experiencing it. It's like the concept of document, don't create. Like let the
Ooh,
observation be the byproduct of the thing that you are focusing on.
so beautifully said. I want to steal that because it's so true. Once you step outside of that thing, once you start to focus on the entertainment factor of it, it disappears, right? That authenticity disappears. It's exactly that.
Yeah, 100%. That's been a big focus of mine. I've mentioned it in other episodes, I think, with this podcast is only talking to people that I'm really interested in talking to and
Mm,
only having conversations that I want to have with those people. And then any conversations outside of that, I'm not interested. Maybe one day when it's like, okay, I'm thinking differently about the podcast. But for right now, it's very much I really want to have incredible conversations with people that I'm interested in having those conversations with. And then hopefully people enjoy the byproduct that they are witnessing, as opposed to creating something for people specifically to listen to.
100%. I feel like that is so true in copywriting specifically. So if we're going to
Mm.
go into like marketing skills, what I always tell my team is I want you to write in a way where the audience feels like you've gotten to know them beforehand. So, the technical way to say that is, you identify the need and then you identify the obstacle and then you provide yourself as a solution and then you make the pitch. It's like, sure, keep that as the skeleton. Again, that's just the assignment, but the execution actually has to be to absorb this audience member so deeply and so connectedly that you are inside that messaging and you are responding to those things yourself with that deep empathy, and that as you stay inside it and create that messaging, what they will receive is going to be fulfilling that assignment. But if you stay outside and you're giving me rote, here I've filled in the blanks, I've checked the boxes of what these things are, it's not going to feel human and it's not going to feel lived in. It has to feel like an individual who felt these things has reached me and they're reflecting me. And I do feel that, in the same way that a chef would say cook with love, you can taste the love, that when you're creating content, you have to be authentic and invested inside of it in order for it to communicate that to your audience and for them to connect on a deeper way.
So that feeling that the audience generates when they felt known, is that a byproduct of your authenticity coming through, or is that a level of understanding that you have about your audience that influences it?
Well, it's a simultaneous reality. So we're talking about, are you having an empathic response or an intellectual response? And my answer as a marketer is like both have to be present. So the intellect is the ability to articulate what you're feeling, and the emotional empathic is the ability to feel it. And both have to be present. That's why I feel like right now, you know, being a marketer is being tossed around to like anyone who can hack the system, which I appreciate deeply. It's so necessary because we live in a digital space and you can't underestimate the power of harnessing the algorithm. Do it 1,000%. But to truly tap into what is great marketing, what is marketing genius, it is that individual who can be both cerebral and heartfelt and emotional about their audience at the same time. To say, like, I am feeling this person's need so deeply that I can use my intellect to articulate it, maybe even better than they could. That mastery of the language over a feeling to provide a solution is where someone says, whoa, that's what I've never been able to put language to. Tell me more. And then they click on tell me more. And whether it's laundry detergent or it's like your new podcast or it's an ebook or it's actually like a service that can help people, they will be able to trust you because they feel like you've invested in getting to know them in an authentic way beforehand. And you're so intelligent, you can articulate their feeling for them. And so use that power responsibly. But that's actually how you can generate that trust, quote unquote, that elusive piece where we're like, build trust before you make the sale, is being able to talk about what someone is experiencing in a way that makes them feel more seen than they could provide themselves, even.
Mm, that's interesting. So it's like an individual feels heard when their feelings and thoughts are clearly articulated.
100%. Yeah. And that takes the responsibility as a marketer of like deeply getting to know someone. But that's also something that I practice quite a lot in acting, is I have to know my character so deeply that I can stand and believably represent them on stage. That they're actually coming from me and the audience is like, I believe that that's who that is. And that's learning someone with both my mind and my, more abstract part of me, whether you believe that's a soul or a heart or just the emotional part of you.
So there's something about poking that outer shell and getting comfortable with being uncomfortable so that you can be comfortable with being yourself, because very rarely does anybody just pop out of the womb being comfortable with who they are, right? You go through
Right.
a developmental stage where you're observing the world around you, and then you notice social engagement and social cliques, and you think, I want to be in this clique. This is how I size people up. This is how I size myself up. This is how I identify who I need to like me, and so on. And we grow up, and it makes sense from a survival standpoint, right? Like, we are herd animals. It's important that the community likes you, but you get to a point where shedding the weight of that and not needing to rely on the community emotionally or physically is so empowering, so that you can
Yeah.
find your own community that is authentically you and you authentically fit with.
100%. I mean, I have two kids and w- it's so cliche, but it's so true that when you see a child go after the world and learn a language and stack blocks over and over and over and fail over and over and over and say again, 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 you realize, like, oh my gosh, their lack of fatigue has so much to do with their lack of anticipating failure. Like, they do not
Mm,
tire out because failure is not in their vocabulary. And I love that you said like cracking that outer shell. When we bring like that authenticity and that connection into like whatever our ambitions are. The reason why I think it sometimes feels more challenging for those of us that authentically connect to what we're passionate about is because we're going to feel those messy moments and those like quote unquote failures deeper than the person who's just pursuing it by rote. But we can't forget that confusing pain and failure or confusing failure and opportunity is really where the difference is. Because when a child sees a tower knock over, they may cry, they may get upset, but they're going back to those blocks and they're going to build it again. Because even if it's like their frustration or their impatience, even if they like throw it across the room, which happens,
Mhm.
when they get upset, they're going to stack and they're going to stack and they're going to stack because they also have no concept of running out of time. They're in the present moment, they're building, and they're going to watch it fall over and over again. And they're going to think the problem is with these blocks, and I'm going to keep going until I dominate it. And then you watch them develop skills over time, and you remember, I'm still one of these creatures. Like these are in a different species than myself. And so I see at least my life right now in three phases. When I was too young to coach myself into being stiff or being inauthentic, like the ignorance of youth that was so powerful. And then developing skills and becoming afraid of making a mess. And then breaking into like this third phase of like, what happens when I bring authenticity to my skill set? And that to me is like the magic sauce. That to me is when you have reached the beginning, probably, I should say, of your pursuit, but that you've actually clicked into your pursuit. That's when you can like call yourself yourself.
Yeah. It's also interesting when you notice a child, they build something and they don't have any anticipation for what it should look like. They're more
Oh,
observing it. And then when
totally.
it falls, they don't even notice that it's failure, how we would define failure. They're just
Exactly.
observing something. And then they might go through that cycle over and over again and are simply trying to process, oh, this is a cause and effect, and I'm trying to achieve a thing, but I can't get there. Interesting. Why is that? And once we backpedal out of this anticipation or making failure a negative thing, that's when the magic happens because that's when the pressure is relieved.
100%.
That's when we can think more creatively because we don't have those pressures or stresses. And I'm experiencing a lot of that with posting on social media currently, where
Mm,
I'll post something and just observe, oh, how did the post land? How do people engage with it? And I've had some total flops, absolute
totally.
flops. And it's been more interesting to me than anything else to think, oh, I thought that post would do a lot better. Or,
Mm,
oh, I don't care that it flopped because this is something that I felt like creating in the moment. So I gave it to the world. I don't expect them, like, I don't need them to respond. Like, they're not validating what I'm creating. I'm validating it and showing them what I validated because I created a thing. And so
yeah.
it's been this interesting exercise for me in removing the expectation, but just appreciating and observing the process and learning about myself during
Yeah.
this journey.
100%. I feel like the adult brain sees blocks as like blocks become towers, and a child's brain is blocks go up and down. And like embracing that fluctuation, like sound waves, like data points, they're going to be scattered, but you have to do enough of them and just ensure that they're trending in your direction and not getting fixated on the outliers and not getting fixated on the up and down. Um, Social media is really interesting because the success of a single post, if that's what we become fixated on, is missing the point entirely. Something that I talk to my clients about all the time is posting on a profile and social media are two very different things. You can post and post and post and post, but unless you know what your goal is in terms of connection, unless you know what you're building, is it an audience? Is it views? Is it, like I can put it in terms of these KPIs, but really what I'm asking them is how are you defining success so that you can trend in that direction, so that you can like have a something to compare to so that you can make an assessment that's not just based on your feelings in the moment but actually based on like a plan and a strategy. Those single posts and the performances of a single post and like content is king without an understanding of, oh, the goal of like this post going out is to become a part of a group, and that group is a part of a campaign, and that campaign is actually part of outreach, and that outreach is reaching other people. Then when you create backwards from that point, you have people as part of your plan and you're putting the human element back into your campaign. Whereas social media, I'm constantly asking my team to ask themselves the question, one, what is your goal? How are you going to find success in terms of connection? And then two, how are you going to make that successful by identifying who is on the other side of that post and creating backwards from them? And then three, you are quality control. If you create content and you're bored, I'm bored, they're bored. Like, trust your gut, but then also like find that joy that I was talking about earlier. I'm like, if you create content that excites you, people are going to feel that and it's going to excite someone else. And that, going back to the contact improv, being inside that post, being inside like that editing bay or like those reels, and like you pop an emoji on there, not because you read somewhere that like popping emojis is going to make it more visually vibrant, but you're actually like, that would be hilarious or that would be really impactful. And you're like, love that, cracking yourself up. Like, send that out into the world and it's going to hit different. It's going to hit differently with people because it was made by someone who had a response. It elicited a human response. So it's already tested and proven by you in the creation of it.
And then the type of person that gets drawn in is the type of person who aligns
Correct.
with what you're authentically creating.
Correct. And then that answers the audience targeting question, right? Of, it's easy to say, if you're trying to attract everybody, you're going to attract nobody. And you're like, great, now I'm stuck. But actually, what it's about is, no, just like tell the truth to one person. Know who that one person is on the other end. When I coach people on Twitter, I'm like, you've got a group text. Who's on your group text? And send that group text out into the world, but make it that personal. Understand that it's wide scale, but know that like you're trying to provide a message to another person, because that way you are creating an audience target without needing to build the skills or like being trained on like how to create audience targets. I have the education for that. I have the experience in building audience targets, but anyone can do it if they visualize who's on the other side of that screen. That's just essentially what the exercise is. And that's how you market to the right people without having to market to everybody and still satisfying yourself and fulfilling yourself at the same time.
One of my mentors who pushed me over the edge to start creating content, he told
Which
me,
is so good.
in the beginning, you are going to lose followers. And I was
Oh
like, oh,
yeah.
that's an interesting concept. I didn't realize how excited I would get when I saw it.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me who lost it, so anybody who left me, I didn't know it was you. I'm not telling you that
No
I'm
hard
glad you
feelings. I don't
left.
know who you are.
Yeah. But yeah, seeing the numbers where I would gain a follower, lose a follower, gain a follower, and the first month, my numbers didn't change at all. But there was so much movement in terms of people
Yep.
coming in and going out, and I had no idea how excited it would make me to witness the audience actually taking shape. Like
100% taking
like
shape. Yes.
and it's interesting too because I had previously put something different out into the world, or like the way I
Mm-hmm.
was engaging the world was different, right? So my initial following was people who I'd come across in life, and we had maybe met in school or we met at a friend's place or whatever it is. So they saw a version of me that elicited a follow or triggered a follow. And now I'm putting out a different version of me, something that's more authentic on a deeper level, as well as other things that I'm interested in, like real estate and business and tech and everything else. And so seeing that audience take shape and
Yeah.
seeing new people come in and old people go out, and it's been such a thrilling process to see, okay, this is a community that I'm creating and shaping around something that I'm authentically interested in.
100%. And that makes me so excited because for the most part, when we first like take over a client's email account in digital marketing for email marketing, there's always attrition. There's always loss because we get real focused real fast and we have really clear messaging. And more often than not, they start to get nervous. They're like, oh, but people are unsubscribing. And I'm like, that's good. That's good because we're also seeing people subscribing through our funnels, through our campaigns that are actually targeted, through our campaigns that like have a point. And that point is like what we're going to sell them at the end. We don't want people to stick around who are not going to be interested in the end goal. And they may not know that they're interested in the end goal yet. That's our job. We'll get them there. But we want people to come into the list who are going to eventually be so happy that they signed in. If people just stick around and get stagnant, and what I always say is like snakes shed their skin, rockets dump the waste in order to break through the atmosphere. Like you have to shed the dead weight, and the dead weight are people who are like, don't take me there. I'm going to unsubscribe. And I like bring myself out. What I tell them is, the same conversation around trending. Are we trending toward growth? And if we're trending toward growth and attrition happens and like people are dropping off, we should be so happy because it's the same way gold is refined, it's the same way our audience is refined. And just like you're describing, that's exactly how content is refined. I mean, this is another term that's like thrown around in marketing, like test everything, test all the time, test all the time. Huge yes. But I feel like we get really locked into that term and what it means of like test A/B testing. Again, you can do the assignment, but what I always ask people is like, hey, there's a difference between like filling the law of the assignment and filling the spirit of the assignment. And the spirit of the assignment is this, is that you're willing to put out today's 1.0 version of you into the world. Because the only way that you're going to get to 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 is that response back from your audience. And then you level up 2.0, response back, 3.0, response back. And that again connects back to that contact improv is how are we being proactive and listening at the same time? Because where it's not going to work is where you're like sticking this content out and you're like, people are dropping off and I don't care. That's also not what we're saying, right? What we're saying is like, I'm putting this content out and like people may be dropping off, but I'm really something people getting really excited. So how can I zone in on them, narrow in onto this conversation, really focus in? And that's where that authenticity and that connection comes in saying, we are now proactively listening and responding to each other simultaneously. And then we say, like, we'll create a relationship with your audience and trust. That is actually the byproduct of that being proactive and listening at the same time, just like a relationship, audience
Mm,
relationship. Yeah.
I love that. It being the byproduct of it.
Yeah.
It's
The
it's
listening.
yeah. Like so often the byproduct is the goal that people go for, and if you go for the goal, then you won't get it. You need to go for something else, and then the byproduct
Correct.
is the thing that you're looking for. It's like people chase money so often, but
Yeah.
if you chase delivering value first, then the money starts
Woo.
pouring in. So it's like the more you're just chasing money, it's like chasing your own tail. You're not actually going to get anywhere unless you chase the value that you're confident you as a unique individual can deliver, and then everything else you actually might be looking for comes pouring in behind.
100%. Because you know what? People also can pick up on that value. They can pick up on the people who are like taking them to the sales goal. Sometimes they can't, but like it doesn't feel good when someone's taking me to a sales goal to like make a profit. But if someone's going to make a profit by taking me to a goal that also benefits me, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. I will only work for clients that are genuinely providing something that will benefit an individual or society, right? It's just how I market. And that's because I always want to make sure that we're leading people to something that brings them value back, but that's also what keeps our marketing value focused, like you're talking about. And the return happens as a byproduct of that. There's actually a lot of like, for the theater folks out there, this will be 101, but there are acting principles that we really would deep dive in graduate school that pertain to this, where we talked about acting is active listening first. So when you're on the stage, you know your lines, you know your character, but the performance comes from actually seeing the person in front of you and hearing what they're saying and letting it hit you. And when you let it hit you, you say the line from that place. And that's why the audience believes you, is because they saw it hit and they believe that you started talking because of how it impacted you. And so, when we're talking about marketing, I say like that's the technical term, that's the commercial term. But the human term for marketing is messaging that elicits action. And I work with a lot of nonprofits, and so much about marketing that serves the nonprofit clients that we work for, who are like my absolute gems, is that the marketing is not just, earning for these organizations to thrive, but it's also because they have a mission to create an impact socially. And so, how are we creating messaging that is active listening, that can generate a response that's so authentic that people are moved to action? And that's the deep work that I think not a lot of people actually are taking into consideration when they're looking at their marketing. It starts to feel really heady, starts to feel really abstract, but really all we're saying is, what does your client need? What does your audience need? And what value can you provide to them? And you use your minds to articulate that value. That's really the more left brain description of what that moment is. But
What would you say is the most difficult to communicate to a client when you're trying to communicate those things to them and they're just not getting it? What would you say is the most challenging thing to communicate?
any panic that they feel is not the metric to use when determining your next step in the marketing strategy. Sometimes being inside the budget or inside the organization or inside your company, and you're like, oh, we got to sell, we got to sell, we got to sell. And you start to use that energy with your audience, you're going to lose them fast. And, nonprofits go through end of year campaigns for fundraising. And I created a free worksheet called the end of year campaign checklist, so that you can audit your campaign and take a look at, are there any like bad habits that have crept in because of your current fatigue or because of your, your current panic or worry for the status of your organization, which is real. But the first one is to abandon crisis branding. Like, we won't do flash sales. That might work for select instances or products. So if you're like listening, you're like, I love flash sales. They work great for me. I'm so happy. But like, for the most part, if what you're trying to do is develop brand loyalty and you're trying to do audience growth while increasing brand loyalty, right? That simultaneous act of retention and expansion, which you're like, how do I, distribute my resources to both? You have to make a commitment to abandon crisis branding because people do not want to jump onto a sinking ship. And this is the brave act of marketing, is to say, how am I transparent about my need? Even like if you're a nonprofit organization, or if you're someone who's like, we need your help to support this local business, that is all very appropriate and awesome, because that's transparency that will make a connection, that authenticity, right, with your audience. But if it's, we cannot survive, we're going down, like trying to guilt people into engaging with you, like they have a responsibility to support you, they have no responsibility to you. You have to make an offer of value to the community before they engage with you. You have to make an offer of value to your client before they jump on board with you. And the best way to combat that panic that you feel, where you're like, I'm scared for my business, I'm scared for my organization, you are allowed to have those feelings, talk about them with your internal team. But the best way then to elicit action from your clients or from, audience expansion, is to actually put your wins forward, to say, hey, remember when we brought you this? Remember when we did this production? Remember when we brought you this product and you love it? And actually, by reminding the client or showing new clients wins they missed out on, you are generating with your clients you want to retain that nostalgia of, oh, I want that hit again. I want that feeling again of win with this company. I want to re-engage. And then with the new clients who missed out on that opportunity, you're creating a FOMO of like, hey, you missed it this time around, but you could get it now. You could get it this time. And they're like, oh, I could, I missed something, and they might not even have known they missed something. But like when you presented them, like, you missed a really good thing. This was a huge win for all of us who took part in it. They're like, I want that. I want that win. Because while the audience around us, like, right, our potentials, our client potentials that are out there, that we're like, how do I achieve that client potential and that audience potential in their lives? What they will always be needing more of is wins. And if you can communicate, we've got some to share, just jump in, they're going to jump onto that ship. There are things to win here. There are things to engage here. And just part of the authenticity is make sure that's what you're actually offering. But offering that is going to make the connection. And so while you can stay confident even in your place of deep need, that is going to be the fastest way to actually get the result that you want. And so that's always a very gentle but needed conversation that I have with my clients sometimes, of trust us, because we're taking, this crisis point in your organization so seriously that we're going to take care of your audience, because that's what's going to draw them into you. Don't lead with panic. Actually, lead with the wins, and make it an invitation.
So is that panic typically from the discomfort of the content or how they're engaging with the audience, or is it a byproduct of something going on in their business that bleeds over into the content and the audience can pick it up?
It can be both. A lot of times our agency comes in to support an organization that either has been burned by bad marketing before, and we make it better. And then we create entire systems. So just for folks listening, if you don't know, our company, Rachel Media, is an entire agency team of specialists that like you hire for one payment, and like we come in and we create your entire marketing department customized. Like we identify your pain points, and I'm like, this is who I want on my team to come in and take care of your work. Um, and so sometimes there is kind of that like we've been burned before moment. And so we realize that we not only take care of the audience then from the immediate, we also want to take care of the client from that moment to say, like, we realize that we have to earn your trust in the same way. And so it can come from that, that fear, that discomfort of you're trying trendy stuff that we've never done before. You're trying emails that we feel like have not been responded well to before. But it can also come from, like I said, real need. Like right now, arts organizations are not being funded by major corporations and grants in the same way that they have in the past. And so there's this disproportionate dependency now on sales and on people participating. And so the pressure that puts on, God, unfortunately, sometimes solo marketers in organizations, but also on teams, is that the organization is like, we're panicking. You need to put this in the email. You need to put more emails out. And we have to, have a gentle conversation of saying, like, we hear your panic. We are going to strategize to directly address this need to create direct return that will create sales that will fulfill this need. But this need is not the messaging. And so it can come from that. And for the most part, when we have a conversation with our clients, thankfully they've been all very responsive, but we also have the work to show for it, where we say, look at this return that you're already getting that you didn't get before, because what we're doing is we're creating an answer for the audience's need, and then they want to respond by supporting us and what we're asking for.
That makes sense. Can you share more about the parasocial relationship? Is that what it's called?
Oh yeah, the parasocial relationship for like content creators and what happens with their audience.
Yeah, because I would love to tie that into your experience in theater and Broadway with how you engage with people at mass and some of the lessons that you learned and how those two things tie together.
Yeah, that's great. So, parasocial relationship is something that we talk about in marketing for our individual content creators, where there will be so deep of a personal connection with their followers that it can start to skew the followers' perspective and even the content creators' perspective that these are real relationships. And, just from a human standpoint, I always like to take care of folks' mental health and say, remember, you actually do not answer to them at the end of the day. Like, create an independent life from this, curate a brand that you can sustain, that like you will be proud of later on. But then also for the audiences, making sure that that brand is communicating to them, like, I'm listening to you, and I'm, like doing that proactive response. But that doesn't mean that I'm having to comply to you 100%. So the parasocial relationship, and this will, spill over to my answer in terms of like what happens on stage, is that it becomes an unhealthy dependency when the audience feels like they get to dictate the narrative. And I can liken that to like performing on stage. It would be like if the audience like isn't responding well, and some shows are intentionally structured this way. It's not what I'm talking about, but as a whole, if I started to change the play on stage because I thought maybe they don't like it, that would be a really poor choice, right? Like that would just send us into chaos, because it's like, no, you are leading this narrative. We're talking about listening to the audience and like letting them respond and like shape the pace. But actually, you're supposed to be so inside this world, just like in contact improv, you're supposed to be so connected with your partner that you're not allowing these parasocial relationships influence and dictate your ability to stay connected to your goals, to your objectives, to your connections, and to the present. And performing on stage, you can't see them unless you have moments where you look out into the audience, which honestly, as a performer, are some of my favorites. To make eye contact with like 500 people is a like bolt of adrenaline that I will never get enough of. Hire me, put me on stage right now. Like, just talking about it makes me so excited. I actually made my Broadway debut as a cover. The show had already been going for about 5 minutes, and they pushed me on stage, half dressed and mic'd, and I was like in the scene, and I just had to like respond like that. Okay, that's another story. But the opportunity to like stand on stage and know that there are like hundreds of people potentially judging, right? You have to flip that to be like, they all want our success. We're sharing in the success. The way that I always connect it is through breathing and breath, where my ultimate goal, just psychologically, before I start my prep for the show, is by the end of the play, we're all going to be breathing together. And I just let that fall into my subconscious as my goal. Audiences don't know that, but that's my goal. And I get them to do it. But where then my goal is to just connect and breathe with my scene partner and like fall into this. And when this is on stage, we have a natural agency. When like you're creating content, you have a natural agency. So if you're trying too hard for that, you're going to lose it. But if you just like hang on to that connection and you don't collapse the space by like trying to grab a hold of it too tight, then the audience and those watching will also fall into that connection and that breath. But that's also rooted in our humanity as well. Like we have to remember that not all of this is fabricated. Not all of this is manufactured. Social media is social because we as human beings want community. We have empathic nerve endings. We want connection. We're seeking that connection. And so the deeper you can find that, the more people are going to find that in you. And so when you're on stage, the deeper I can find that with my scene partner, the deeper the audience is going to find that in us and the story that we're telling. And so it's a really powerful and courageous practice because the very thing that you want to influence, like the audience, is the very thing you have to let go of completely sometimes when you're creating, like completely.
So back to you can't go for the thing that you want. You have to go for a different thing to get the thing that you want.
And I'm so glad you brought it up again because this is another acting. People are going to listen to this podcast and be like, "We wanted marketing tips, but now you think I could become an actor?" Like maybe you can. But no, it's an acting practice that I find deeply, deeply valuable. But when we talk about, what does your character want? Is like, like there's that joke where like you see people like making fun of actors, like, what's my motivation? But the reason why we genuinely ask like what your character wants, and if you say something like to buy the house that's in the play, your instructor, your director is going to be like, no, that's the plot objective. What is the character's objective and what's their super objective? And the super objective is what they want beyond the play. What are they shooting for? It's like you don't shoot to the target, you shoot through the target, right? And one of our professors, I ascribe to this. Some people don't. It's fine. And there are many different, artistic philosophies. But one of our professors said the super objective is always love. And so even the villains, what if everyone was pursuing something like so enormous and so universal, and it's on the other side of all of their obstacles, and they need it so badly? We talk about stakes, that they go after it with life or death, that they go through every obstacle, and maybe the obstacle wins. We don't know. Like that's the conflict of the scene. Maybe the obstacle is a person, maybe it's a circumstance, but you don't play the obstacle. You don't play the plot objective. You actually play that this person needs something massive and universal, and then needs something very specific that's in the play and how they're talking. But they're willing to like go through obstacles or confront obstacles or respond to obstacles because they need it at the stakes of life or death. And when you watch that on stage, suddenly it's not a play about buying a house and like falling asleep. Suddenly you're like, this person doesn't quit. Like they're back in this room talking to, what's going to happen? Isn't she supposed to leave with it? And like, suddenly you're watching people who are revving up the engine of humanity that we as human beings cannot help but be fascinated by, because it starts to wake up our own engines. And that can be like really exciting. That can be uncomfortable. And so like the discomfort of theater is not always like the performance art that like we don't really intellectually get. Sometimes it's the discomfort of, and the absolute attraction to, watching human beings pursue something in spite of the obstacles, where we're just reminded that's what I'm doing or not doing right now. Like, what am I pursuing? What's my super objective? And I think that, if you're starting a business, if you're like in a relationship, if you're doing marketing, asking that question of, I always ask my clients, like, how would you define success? Like, what is your goal when you're posting all of this content? What is your social media objective? What's your campaign objective? What is your super objective that you always want to hit that target, and it's the clean line that people are watching you pursue and often fail. And if you take your theater clown class, you know that it's actually the failure that's the entertainment. Different story. But having that super objective, to me, is like how we tap into that essential trajectory that we're looking for. Like the path is made once you know what that super objective is.
Yeah. And understanding what the audience's super objective is. It's like
Oh, for sure.
in Sales 101 when they mention when they say things like, okay, if you're selling a mattress, you're not selling the special
Correct.
space foam. You're selling a great night's sleep. Like, what is that person
Exactly.
actually looking for?
Well, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier. To like in acting, it's knowing your character, and in marketing, it's knowing your audience so deeply that you're talking about a good night's sleep because you know that's what they're looking for, and at the end is a link to a mattress. That's the marketing story that you tell, is like the character that you know so deeply that you identify they're super objective. They're like, oh, I feel seen. Maybe this person can help me reach it, and they click. And they pursue it that way.
Tell us about the clown story. I
The clown.
love this. The
There's so many clown
clowns.
stories. Which clown story are you remembering?
Or at least at least what the clown exercise was. Maybe it was the first time you put the nose on, or no,
Yeah,
you earn your nose.
you earn your nose.
What is it? Oh goodness, I wish I remembered more clearly. But something about
There's so
I'm
many
like,
stories that it could be.
I love these conversations because they are so meta about life and how humans actually are.
That's usually where we
And
go, right? With our
theater,
conversations.
yeah,
Yeah.
and theater breaks that down into components so that each
Mm,
element can be understood in terms of human nature. And it's almost like the process of breaking down a character so that you can rebuild yourself back up with it
yeah.
and understanding the different elements. And this is one of my favorite elements, probably because to a moderate extent, I am a somewhat of a masochist and I get so much joy out of the discomfort. But this exercise, it leans so hard into the discomfort.
Theater clown is a very serious practice. And it is. And when you need to all take a theater clown class, because it is the most baffling and enlightening course you may ever take. And part of it is because it'll illuminate the parts of you that are the beautiful failures. And when that's the goal of a class, you're like, get me out of here and keep me in, is your feeling the entire time. And the way that you earn your clown nose and name is a very long process. But one of the pieces that included was our instructor, Chris Bays, who's an absolute genius. But he would shout, "Is your name this? Is your name this? Is your name this?" And we'd be like, "No, no, no, no." But the names that would make you say no with your like fullest emotion and fullest self ended up being your name. And it's because it was the words that tapped into the soft underbelly part of you that was your core self. And when he got to me, because I will not tell anyone else the story, he's like, "Is your name Butch? Your name Butch?" And I was like, "No." Because like at the time, especially, I was very scared of people thinking I was angry. And I like was smiling all the time and like nice people. And I was very good at being nice because I'm a nice person. You can tell how defensive I'm getting even now. He's like, he's like, "Yeah, but your name is Butch, right? Butch, are you Butch?" And I was like, "No, no, no." And you had to stand there and you had to like argue with him or like accept your name, or whatever. And I was like, it's not that, it's not that. And it was like feeling like rah, 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 rah. And like it's about like what it brings out in you. And he's like, "His name, Itchy Butch. Are you Itchy Butch?" And I was like, "I'm not Itchy Butch. I'm not." And people started to laugh. And the reason they started to laugh is not because they're mean or because like they're laughing at me, but because I was having like a genuine experience that was not traumatic. I was fine. I was healthy and fine as a human being. But I was like really having an itchy butch reaction to someone calling me that. And he goes, "Are you itchy? Are you itchy butch? Are you itchy butch the turnip?" And I was like, "No." And like shocked and mortified at the same time. And just like the laughter of recognition, because in that moment of like, "Ah," of like just feeling like someone's like naming me in a way that like I did not know how to name myself, turned me into this like hilarious human raw creature and shape, and like that was henceforth known as Itchy Butch the Turnip, which is my clown name, which now that I've outed myself, people are now welcome to call me. And I'm like, I'm only that when I have my nose on. And just kind of like the that you like sat with after was also the same feeling that you get after running a marathon, or like just that kind of like fatigue of like, oh, your shell has been spent. And that's the genius of theater clown, where it's like my sister was like, theater clown sounds like a super weird, cheesy class. Like, do you like do balloon animals? And I was like, come watch. And she got to observe the class, our sister did. And she was like, that class was so depressing and so enlightening at the same time. And I was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually where the deep work happens, is in clown class. Um, because there's also exercises like, oh, look at the invisible, beautiful thing. Look how beautiful it is. And you're not allowed to like step off stage until you imagine the most beautiful thing. And like before you know it, like there's tears in your eyes and you're like holding it gently close and you're like, there's nothing there. Like it's really about bringing out the power of the human being to the forefront for people to witness, even in like a failed moment, even in a beautiful moment, even in a simple moment. And there are much more like clown fluent people than myself who can describe this better. But in my experience and where I am right now in my journey, that is what I have gleaned from it, that I am Itchy Butch the turnip. And embracing that honestly has been my place of power, because that's also the class where he said, take the hanger out of your mouth. And that means like the smile that never leaves is actually getting in my way of like the smile that's been earned, or the smile that's actually felt. And so there are moments like that where it's like, oh, if like if someone's listening to this to really like be like, well, what does this have to do with me professionally? It has so much to do with no matter what your profession is. I know I'm talking about marketing and like clicking sales links. I work with arts organizations and nonprofits where actually we're like really trying to generate funding for good causes. So I feel like very confident in like using these skills that I've learned in a marketing capacity. But when we're talking about like, what does this conversation have to do with work and like with growing my business or all these things, it's like, because the world needs, and sustainable growth needs, healthy, authentic human beings inside of it. And we can only get there if we're like in a constant practice with ourselves as individuals to lead our companies, to have conversations with our audiences that are authentic, to create content, quote unquote, that will actually make people feel a real connection, to market, tickets to a show or a theater moment that will make an entire community connect. In order to be leaders of those conversations, in order to be leaders in our business, I also talk about how are we listening to not just the audience outside of our organization, but the audience inside our organization. And to do that, we have to take the hanger out of our mouth and not just being like the smile that's frozen there, but say like, how am I listening and proactively responding and watching for the smiles that are earned inside my company, inside my organization, so that that health also projects out to connect with my audience.
I love that, because there a handful of amazing things to tease out there. One of which, the taking the hanger out of your mouth. It's so often we create a defense mechanism to protect us, and that thing is
That's
actually
exactly
what's
what it
holding
is.
us back.
Correct.
So if we shifted our perspective, if we shifted it to protecting us from the things that are holding us back,
Right.
how differently would we look at the world?
Correct.
Instead of saying like, oh, I need to protect my, like, how I feel or the perception that people have of me, right? Back to us being herd animals, is how can I protect myself so that I'm welcomed into this community and constantly have a smile? And then it's actually pulling us away from something else that might be totally independent of the herd. Or I guess a better way of saying it is connected to the herd in a different way than we
Right.
originally thought we should be.
Yeah, and it's 100% that, because how differently we respond to the world will also be how differently we let the world in. And that vulnerability, it's like we cannot learn lessons. I love how you talk about embracing failure as an opportunity to learn. That also comes with embracing vulnerability, embracing letting other people come in and influence you, and knowing that you're not going to lose yourself in that moment. Um, as a way to like letting things in is a way of making sure that your output is organic, and that your output has considered other people, and that your output is something that comes from someone who's been listening. And that to me is like really where a lot of the powerful leadership moments happen too. Whether you're speaking on stage and you've just been like taking in your scene partner with everything that you have, and opening yourself up to them, and like kind of receiving what they're giving you, to marketing a nonprofit with a service mission and saying, like, what does this audience really need, and how can I absorb that so deeply that I start to speak their language in the copy, in the email, in like the social media posts, to even if you're running a software company, saying, like, how am I listening to the people working for me and with me on developing this new thing so deeply that I absorb them and understand their need on an empathetic personal level, that when I speak to them, they're like, oh my gosh, this person's learned my language. I'm loyal to you forever. Like, we're in sync. We're on the same team. We're working toward the same goal without you having to say, hey, we're on the same team. We're working for the same goal. They're just going to develop that trust and that relationship with you, um, because you've committed to being so healthy that you can break that outer shell. And yeah, and like drop those defense mechanisms big time.
Especially since often those defense mechanisms and that outer shell is weaker than the thing that it's trying to protect.
Always, always is, because it's been manufactured. And the thing that is trying to protect is the only real thing in the equation.
That warrants a long walk with a cup of hot tea to
Yeah,
think about, really.
for sure.
No, that's amazing because I mean, we all have those shells that we put up. That's why I love exercises like the clown exercise, like you're talking about, because it just beats that shell to a fine dust. So nothing
Oh,
is
yeah.
there. And then you realize, oh, it's actually not that bad to not have this shell.
You're like, oh, I lived through that. I lived through that. What was I so afraid of in the
Yeah.
first place?